All right. Let's see. So we've started the recording. I did have a meta point I wanted to bring up, and we don't have to resolve it here, but I will be out of office next week. So I am looking for somebody to volunteer as a facilitator in my absence. So we could, if you're interested in doing that, it really is just about being present and being able to answer any questions that might come up. But yeah, anybody willing to volunteer for next week?
I'll do it.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Okay, I didn't have to hunt anybody down afterwards. All right, so Natalie, I'll add you as the facilitator for next week on the document. Appreciate it. Oh, okay. Moving on, thank you for that. So it seems like we have two topics, GitHub's actions configuration with the audience being the contributor. I do also see a run versus build. Um, do we know who added that one? I'm just curious if maybe that was a little bit more
I,
applicable.
I added that.
Cool. Uh, do we mind if we do that one first, since I feel like it might be a little bit more general to everybody, and then we could dig into the contributor specific one? Awesome. All right, Sam, do you want to take it away? Your
Uh,
question?
yeah, so I'll briefly describe the use case I'm imagining here, and then I can talk about what the spec says. So currently in the platform spec, it says that the run user ID and group ID should be set to the same user ID and group ID as the build images user. Um, and it should match with the actual images user field. Um, Now, sometimes when you're building apps, you may want to build apps that are essentially frozen or have a read-only file system, so that when you're launching it in, let's say, some runtime environment, the user can't modify the files or directories that have been created during build time. So is there anything that's actually preventing you from changing the user field in the run image to a different user? Because I'm not sure if pack or something actually prevents you from doing that, although the spec says you shouldn't. uh,
So that's a really good question. I kind of want to lean onto the implementation side, since I feel like that's something very low level in that arena. I don't know, Natalie, if you have anything in mind right now, but I guess the part where something like refreshes my mind is the OpenShift platform, right? Which, if my understanding is correct on some of the users for OpenShift, the UID essentially when the application is ran is ran as this other user that's not necessarily the one that the image was created for. Uh, I'm pretty sure that's a true statement. So therefore, I wouldn't say that it's out of the realm of possibilities. As far as the spec is concerned, I think that's a very interesting question.
yeah, I'm just curious why that point is in the spec, if if it has some negative impacts, or if it was just something. I just was curious behind the reasoning for that, because maybe I don't want to set the user externally. So I'm guessing OpenShift, the user is decided by some modification made later on to the image or something else. But let's say in the run image itself, I want to set a different user. Um, what I, is there anything wrong with that, or would anything, I've tried it and it seems to work. So I'm just curious why the spec says it shouldn't.
My understanding of this was that it was from a security standpoint. Is that correct? That you don't want to set the user with elevated permissions than what you need. as defined in the spec?
So I mean, you can still verify that the user is non-root, right? You can still verify that the user is not a user with UID 0. It can be some other user which has even fewer permissions than the one that was used to build the image. So that's the sort of use case I'm getting at, and that's what I'm hoping to achieve.
Does that solve the read-only problem? I have to look, but my understanding of how the exporter will accept a GID and a UID flag, but I believe that it uses those IDs when constructing the layer tars. So like, I don't know, maybe if the objective is to have a read-only file system, maybe there's a way to do that a little more explicitly.
I mean, yeah, my final objective is to have like a read-only file system. Like I want essentially a frozen image, and like the only maybe writable thing should be something like a scratch volume, like either temp or some volume that's attached during runtime. But whatever's there in the image, I would like that to be frozen.
Yeah, the use case is definitely very interesting. I think it definitely makes sense. And like I said, I don't think it's beyond the capabilities or possibilities right now. But as Kenneth was mentioning, um, there I guess if my understanding is correct, we try to veer onto the side where the permissions set on the file system, right, are the permissions that you expect to have at runtime and as build time, right? So I think we're really just trying to align those. As far as the repercussions, what happens when you go beyond that, right? I think that's really the big question. Again, I think one of the other places where this has come up with is with OpenShift. And I know Emily has kind of brought up the mention where we might need to revisit how permissions or our strategy on permissions, because it seems like more often than not, we're actually bitten by the kind of constraints that we've set versus allowing platforms and, I guess in this case, certain use cases from veering off from what the spec specifically says.
Yeah, because I would assume that even if the user is same and I set the directory or file permissions as read only, there's nothing preventing from the same runtime user to change that permission and then write to it, right?
Yeah.
Since it's the same user, they can just, I'm assuming they can just do whatever they want with those files.
I wonder if you could write up the use case just like you did here in the spec channel.
Okay.
And I think we'll get some responses there because I think the people that would really be able to answer a lot of this would be Stephen and Emily. Again, both of them have had prior experience with issues coming up and, very knowledgeable in that arena.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it might be worth actually just putting that on a issue on the spec in GitHub issues. And okay. I'll make sure we circle back around to it at the next leadership meeting when we talk about that stuff.
Thank you so much.
Cool. No, thank you, Sam. That was a good one. Okay, moving on to GitHub Actions configuration. I think, yeah, you brought up this question.
Yeah, I just put a topic. I mean, it was initially something that I brought to discuss in our team, and then we changed the working group to be an office hour. So I thought it'd be something useful for everyone just to discuss how the GitHub Actions work in our repos. I had a chance to work on it a little bit, but I think Javier, I have a feeling that you can drive this and talk about it much more than I do. I think it could be very useful for everyone.
So luckily I passed the baton over to Natalie because this is life cycle. And I was like, hey, I haven't really looked at this in a while. So Natalie, please help.
Sure. I guess, what are we trying to achieve? Like a general sort of overview, or is there like a specific problem that a contributor might be grappling with that we want to clarify?
Specifically for me, there is, I mean, I don't have a specific question. It was just a topic that I think someone brought up in one of our discussions in our tech talks. And then I was thought to myself, okay, maybe we should discuss it more, like more details. So I don't have any question, I mean, any specific question, but I think it's worth like describing what happened, how things are working, what are we doing? I mean, what are we doing? I mean, and I don't know, these kind of things. But again, it's just an idea. If people are aware of what's going on, I mean, we can totally skip this topic. It's just, again, it's just an idea.
Yeah. So maybe two things to interject here. I think I'm interested on, the use of Docker within the build process of the life cycle. I thought that was very interesting, and I don't have enough context there. So I'd maybe like to understand exactly why it is we went that route. The other thing is maybe we want to step back to the previous topic now that Emily jumped on here to try to save the day.
I hope whatever it is, I have a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, so I think Sam has a very specific use case in mind where he wants to create essentially like a read-only app image. And the understanding is that the spec kind of constrains what the GID and UID for the user is between build and run images. And so I guess just wanting some clarification on that. I don't know, Sam, if I did your question justice there.
Yeah, so the primary motive for this is that like we want the runtime image to have even fewer privileges than the whatever user built the image. So we don't want them to modify whatever has been built, and essentially we want a frozen view of the application. And then if it wants to do some processing, it can do that in like separate temporary directories or volumes. And so currently the spec says that the run images user, like the UID, the CNB UID and GID must be set to the user field in the run image, and that must be the same as the build image. But like, I think I've tried it, and there's nothing that prevents me from doing this on pack. Like I can set a different UID and GID, and it seems to work. But the spec disallows that. So I was wondering if there are any repercussions to actually doing this, or why this decision was made. And if we can account for such use cases where we want even fewer permissions during runtime.
So I'm assuming you have like two users that are in the same group. So your build user has write permissions, but your run user only has read permissions to the group.
Yes.
That makes sense to me as a use case. I'm not entirely sure why we explicitly disallow it, other than I guess Buildpacks could make assumptions about what is readable at runtime. And if we don't make any guarantees about the users, then Buildpacks could be setting things up that would fail at runtime if there's different users in the two different images. But I wonder if
that would be a property of the stack though, right? So if the Buildpack says it's compatible with a particular stack, and the stack has different users set on the build image and the run image, whatever Buildpack is compatible with, it should be compatible with the fact that there would be two different users.
Yeah. The other thing is I think some Buildpacks may need to write temp files at runtime in like a profile script or something like that.
that should still be fine. So the only thing I'm looking at restricting is like write access to layers or slash workspace or the user like the home directory for the user that created things.
And like hopefully every file, like let's say a profile script or exec D or something like that needs to write a config file and pass it to something. Like hopefully you wouldn't need to write it to the appter. You could write it to a tempter and use flags or whatever to make it work.
Yeah.
There's probably some edge cases, but I agree with you that we shouldn't disallow it. And we could set it up so that a build pack that says it works on a stack can deal with the permissions on the stack as part of the contract, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely edge cases where that doesn't work because that's how old Heroku used to work on our platform, and we definitely had to change our tune very quickly. But if you're building your own platform that is not a public path, you can definitely like limit what is being used and what is allowed, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we'd want to change the like Ubuntu Bionic stack contract to make this change because I think we don't want to run into edge cases where things break. But for
Wait,
yeah,
what do we want to expose? I guess this comes back to Amway's like want for this new stack section of the spec, but it seems like maybe there's probably some level of things that we want stacks to be able to expose probably there.
yeah, I think we need a stacks section. I'm also wondering if we should be breaking down stack IDs into more granular information so that more build packs can be compatible on things that they should run on. But that's a bigger question.
I think we have like a star stack, but I would love like a namespace stack. So you can specify like a top level namespace. So it's compatible with, let's say, all Ubuntu. Then you can go something down to Bionic and then some other derivatives of that. But something like that would also be great.
It's a really good idea. It makes me really wish we had put a Linux before Ubuntu. So you could do like a Linux start.
I mean, there's nothing stopping us from doing that, right? I think if anything, it'd be similar to like the reverse domain namespacing and allowing for asterisks, wildcards essentially.
I mean, you don't even necessarily need wildcards. You can just allow for like reverse domains, and if it's just Ubuntu, then it just assumes everything under that domain is valid. Like you don't need like partial things like where it's Ubuntu.bi star or something like that. You just need Ubuntu, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I still have my want for being able to associate like namespace names with like other aliases of stacks as a thing.
Namespace names?
Well, like you would imagine like Salesforce or Heroku having its own set of stack things that are compatible with a Bionic because it is underneath, or maybe it's compatible with Ubuntu overall, but it doesn't have to be labeled that way. And it can come with potentially other attributes as well if we expanded on the stack concept.
Couldn't you do that by using the Bionic stack and defining mixins? I guess we said you're not allowed to define random mixins for the Bionic stack.
Yep.
So it sounds like there's multiple RFC ideas, but going back to the original question, it sounds like it's very reasonable to, as a path forward, to suggest that change, right? I'm assuming that would be an RFC proposal.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of thing we probably want an RFC for. The fact that it works now means you can probably do it.
Yeah.
Because it's not broken, but I agree that we should make that clear.
Yeah, I was just hoping that like, because it works right now, I was just hoping like I don't implement, like I don't use some build pack or implement some build pack in the future and then suddenly it stops working and the assumptions crumble. So just wanted to clarify if that's like there's something in the underlying life cycle that assumes those things, or
I mean,
We try
that,
not to break old build packs ever in new lifecycle versions. So even if a new API came out and we added a check to enforce it, we'd probably only add the check for the new API, even though the older versions said they had that requirement, right? So I don't think, like, we're not going to add behavior that breaks something, but I think it's good to capture this as an RFC so we know not to, add that behavior in new lifecycle versions because it's under discussion and maybe not ideal.
yeah, but it could also be a platform validation, right? Like Pack could take this information from the current spec and say, oh, you know what? Like Sam just mentioned that we missed a part of the requirement. Let's go ahead and
Let's
validate
go enforce it and break
yeah,
everything.
it breaks Sam's use case, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Oh man. Okay. All right, so that sounds good. Any more conversation on that topic? Cool. I know I have to drop here in 4 minutes, but if we want to continue to the next topic, we could certainly do so.
So I also have to drop in 4 minutes, but I can do my best in the time that we have to introduce the GitHub actions in the life cycle. Javier had the question about why do we use Docker? So maybe let's share my screen. This one. Okay. And what was it? It was this thing. So we have a bunch of GitHub actions. Probably the one that's most interesting for now is to look at the build, which runs on pushes and pull requests to main and our release branches. You can see it's fairly easy to read. We have tests that run on Linux and Windows. Then we build. Assuming there's no test failures, we will build and package a life cycle on. Looks like because we're able to cross compile the life cycle, we can just do the builds for Linux and Windows all on Ubuntu. We're currently pinned to 1804 because we had a weird thing that happened, but something that we can probably unpin with a small change. And then what's probably interesting for our purposes here is the fact that we package the lifecycle binaries into the format that you would see on the release page. If we decide to ship these artifacts, these artifacts would be the ones that you download. So that gets uploaded, to wherever GitHub keeps track of them. And then to answer Javier's question, after all of that has happened, we publish the lifecycle image, which if you don't know what that is, I'm going to shamelessly plug a blog post that I wrote. I can get the chat back, which explains why it's there, what it's used for. Oh, here it is. More chat. We actually build that image with our own tooling that makes use of ImageUtil and kind of mimics the way the exporter builds images. But because it was harder to do that, to create a manifest list, we use the Docker CLI just to join the Linux and Windows images together so they can be pulled down, you know, with that ambiguous reference. And that was the best I could do in 4 minutes. But if there are any other, you know, any questions, any confusion, any ways that we can make it better, please let us know and we'll look into it.
We could probably use GGCR to do it directly if we wanted to, but this was the fast way.
I was gonna ask, why aren't we dog fooding? But I mean, I know the answer, but it would be something nice to strive for.
It's because we require in the spec the life cycles at a certain path. And you could try to set the after to be CMB lifecycle, but that's a problem because during the build, which is done by the lifecycle is at CMB lifecycle. It's like the one thing you can't, the one path you can't set because it has to build itself. All right, I gotta drop. I'll see y'all.
Same here.
Bye.
I think we'll call it early due to availability. But yeah, catch us next time, and we might even discuss this topic further if we want to dive into anything specific. All right,
Yeah,
thank you
thanks
all.
so much.